Well, hey there. Welcome back to our Sky Tonight program. My name is Seth Mayo. I'm the curator of astronomy for the Loman Planetarium at MOAS. And in this edition of the program, we're covering the dates of February 7th through February 13th. We're going to start by talking about the moon being fairly close to the planet Uranus from our point of view, that large gas ice giant world. Then we're going to look in the very southern part of our sky where we have an opportunity to see the second brightest star in the night sky, Canopus, if you're in the right place in the world. And then we're going to hop into the morning sky where we're going to find Venus at its brightest for this year and until the summer of 2023. So let's get to it. Right at the beginning of this week, on Monday, February 7th, if you focus on the moon, which would be a very large crescent, just a night before a half phase, the moon will be very close to the planet Uranus. Now, Uranus is something you can't see with your naked eyes, but it's something you can find with a telescope, and you can use the moon to help you to locate this very distant planet that's about 1.7, 1.8 billion miles from the sun. This planet is really, really far away. So let's focus on this planet here in Stellarium. We're going to locate it here with the search tool and get right to it. Now the moon is a little bit larger than it should be. We have it exaggerated for our viewing so we can see a little bit better, but let's scale it down to a more normal or realistic size here, and the moon will still be very close to the position of Uranus in our sky. We'll kind of zoom in a little bit more in this area. Now, these two objects won't be right on top of each other, at least as seen from most of the world. But again, they're fairly close. We can use an angle measurement tool here in Stellarium to kind of roughly figure out how far away they are. We'll kind of measure from here, where Uranus is located, right kind of to the edge of the moon here, right about there. So what we find here is that the angular separation is just less than 2 degrees. So that means you could fit a little less than 4 full moon widths between these two objects at this time. So again, that's fairly close and helpful. If you do find the moon, can maybe help you to find this planet, which again is an object that is too far to see for most people with their naked eyes. But if you do have a telescope and locate this planet, even through a small telescope, you may see kind of a little dot here. And what it may look like is a very round object. Not so twinkly like a star, but you have a better chance of seeing a more well-defined round object since this is a planet as opposed to an actual star, much more distant in our sky. So as you zoom into Uranus here, it's always a wonderful planet to check out and to talk about here. I think it just gets overlooked because we can't see it easily, but there we have it. Now Uranus is a fascinating planet, the third largest by diameter, but the fourth largest by mass in our solar system. It's a gas planet, but also known as an ice giant, and that refers to many of the ices that we call it that are located inside the planet. We're talking about water and ammonia and methane, especially elements and molecules heavier than hydrogen and helium. There's a lot of hydrogen and helium, much like Jupiter and Saturn, but Jupiter and Saturn have much lighter materials, like those two elements, while Uranus and Neptune have more of those ices inside. There's a small rocky core inside this planet. Around it is this dense fluid of icy material, and then the layers of kind of more tenuous gases above that. And as we zoom in a little bit more here, what we find in Stellarium at least is the ring system here, very thin ring system that was discovered when we had spacecraft flying by it. And the only spacecraft to fly by Uranus was in 1986 with Voyager 2. We haven't had any other mission to visit this planet up close. So hopefully that can be changed in the future with missions to these outer planets in our solar system. It's a fascinating world with rings that are kind of tilted up and down because this is a very heavily tilted planet with a 97-degree tilt, as opposed to Earth's tilt, which is 23.5 degrees. So a very tilted planet, so it's on its side basically, and rotating kind of up and down, if that makes sense, in its 17-hour day. So definitely an oddball planet, lopped on its side with a thin ring system. The bluish gas comes from the methane, we think, that's inside of it that creates that appearance. And there's a lot of moons around Uranus as well. As we zoom out, you can kind of see some of them in Stellarium. In total, we've discovered 27 moons around this planet. And what's fun to know about those moons is they're named after characters from two very famous poets and authors by Shakespeare and Alexander Pope. Their characters from their many stories have been assigned to the names of the moons of Uranus, which I always love. And the name Uranus is named after the Greek god of the sky, which was known as Uranus, and today we call it Uranus. This name was proposed by Johann Bode, a famous German astronomer, who confirmed that this was a planet in the late 1700s, but he wasn't the one who actually discovered this planet. That is credited to William Herschel, that famous English astronomer, who found it with his own telescope in 1781. And ever since then, we've known it as this large gas ice giant, the 7th planet from our sun in the solar system, and the first planet to be discovered with a telescope. So, great planet to find. Again, through most telescopes, it might look like a little roundish kind of star, but it's nice to be able to find this ice giant not far from the moon, which is kind of a cool thing to know. So sometimes you can use a bright object, an easy to find object, to find dimmer, more obscure things in the sky. I do that all the time because that serves as reference points to objects like this. So maybe if you're out on the 7th looking at the moon, you'll know very near to the moon, just west of it, is the planet Uranus, the 7th planet in our solar system, and one that is fun to find in the sky. Now, as we gaze toward the very southerly part of the sky in the evening, and especially here in February, this is a great time of year to see the second brightest star in the night sky, the one known as Canopus. We can see down here in Stellarium. Now, keep in mind, you have to be in a rather southerly location if you're in the northern hemisphere. Here in Daytona, where our museum sits, we're about 29 to 30 degrees north latitude. So that gives us enough southerly latitude to see this southerly star. If you're anywhere above 37 degrees north latitude, you cannot see the star. You are too far north and the star sits below the horizon. But for those who are below 37 degrees north latitude, or if you have a chance to visit a location like that, maybe around this time of the year you can find this star. Now, more recently, we have talked about the brightest star in the night sky, Sirius, which is right up here. Now, Sirius can be seen much farther north in our sky. Fortunately, many people can see that. But if you do find Sirius, you'll notice that almost directly south of it is that star Canopus down here. And even though Canopus is the second brightest star in the night sky, it's still only half as bright, approximately, to Sirius, the brightest star that we find here. So we look down here very low on the horizon. You can see right when it's getting dark in the evening at this time of year, at least in this location where we can see it, we can find it just peeking above the southeastern horizon. So we'll just go a little bit later here, and as we do through this week, you'll see it kind of rise higher as you stay up until 8, and then eventually 9, and then really by like 10 and 11 o'clock, you're going to see it at its highest directly south that we find there, and then thereafter maybe for an hour or two more before it gets really low in the southwest. But it's a great time to try to see this star, which has actually an interesting history and is part of a very interesting constellation. If we zoom into it, we're going to turn on the constellation it sits in, and a lot of that constellation sits in the southern hemisphere sky. So for us to see it, I'm going to turn off the ground here, and what you'll notice is that Canopus is part of a large ship constellation that's divided into 3 separate constellations. So the star is in the back end, the aft end of the ship, or the keel. So this is part of the constellation called Carina, and the star Canopus sits pretty far in the back of it and is the brightest star in Carina, and by far one of the brightest stars you see anywhere around in this sky. So it really stands out, and it's always been a very important navigational tool for explorers and for astronomers. Even was used by the Voyager spacecraft as a navigational star as they traveled to the outer solar system. So it has a lot of navigational history to it. Now, this star used to be part of what was called Argo Navis. Argo Navis was the ship of the Argonauts led by Jason, who were in search of the Golden Fleece in Greek mythology. But the name Canopus may actually relate to another ship, this time in the stories of the Trojan War. This ship was owned by the king of Sparta named Menelaus, and Menelaus led the Sparta contingent in the Trojan War, and who also captured Helen of Troy. His pilot was named Canopus, so that name may connect with that. There is another possible origin story for the star, and it could date back way before the ancient Greeks to the ancient Egyptians, because the name Canopus comes from the Greek name Canobus, which may come from the Coptic name Kahi-Nub, which means golden earth. And the idea is that ancient Egyptian observers may have noticed this star sitting low in the sky, and when an object is low, the light from that object has to go through more atmosphere, the light's refracted a bit more, and may turn the star a more reddish or golden color. And so this star may have been nicknamed the Golden Earth object in the sky, eventually leading to the name Canopus as it went through many translations over the years. And one really kind of interesting fact about that golden Earth origin story relates to my favorite science fiction novel and now great new movie, and that is of Dune. If you're not familiar with Dune, the main planet described in that story, known as Arrakis, this famous desert planet with this elusive spice that is the most valuable substance in the universe, well, that fictional planet is around the star Canopus. And Frank Herbert, the writer of Dune, may have been inspired by that golden Earth origin story, connecting his hot desert planet with that golden Earth name. So that may be an interesting connection between that and Dune. And as an aside, if you haven't seen the new Dune movie, you definitely have to see it. It is absolutely amazing, and even more amazing that that fictional world in that story revolves around this star, the second brightest star in our night sky. Now, scientifically, this is an equally interesting star. So this is actually a star inherently much brighter than Sirius if you compare the two next to each other. But Canopus is 310 light years away versus Sirius, which is only about 8.5 light years away. So it makes up the difference in brightness by Sirius's close proximity to us. Canopus is much farther away. A very luminous star, possibly up to 14,000 times brighter than our sun, about 8 times more massive, and up to 70 times larger in diameter than our sun. Canopus is a white, very hot star, kind of at the later stages of its life, most likely fusing helium in its core, and it's already been expanding after it ran out of hydrogen in its core. So it's in its waning years of its life and gotten quite large in comparison to our sun. So this very bright star, even though it's the second brightest star in the night sky, inherently is a very luminous star on its own. And even at the great distance that it lies, it still makes it into the second brightest star category. So it's a wonderful star to find in the sky if you're below 37 degrees north latitude. If you do find it, this is a great time of year. So good luck finding Canopus, our second brightest star in the night sky. Now, if you get up early in the morning before sunrise right now, and you're looking towards the east and southeast, you have a lot of great planets to see in the sky, especially the brightest planet visible from Earth, and that is Venus. We've been talking about Venus transitioning from the evening sky into the morning sky now, and now it really shines. And what's great is starting on the 9th of this week, and for the rest of the week after that, we have Venus at its brightest right now. And that's when it sits at about negative 4.7 in magnitude. Remember, the lower the number in magnitude, the brighter it gets. So we even get into negative numbers for magnitude. And just as a refresher from a video I did last December, the December 6th through 12th episode, I talked about how magnitude works and how it's reverse logarithmic. So that means that every magnitude difference you have is 2.5 times change in brightness. So magnitude 0 is 2.5 times brighter than a magnitude 1 object. And it works like that, so on and so on, through all the various objects in the sky. So a very bright planet, by far brighter than any planet or any star. It's nearly 20 times brighter than the brightest star in the night sky, which is Sirius that we just mentioned recently. And the reason why Venus is bright is for 2 reasons. And this is something we mentioned back in last December when it was brightest for the end of 2021. So let's actually zoom into Venus here, and we actually can see what's going on with the planet, because if you didn't already know, Venus goes through phases just like our own moon. Since Venus sits in orbit inside of Earth's orbit, that means that as it goes around the sun can hit Venus at different angles, allowing us to see different sides of the planet lit. And so here we have a thin crescent Venus, and that may make you wonder, how is it at its brightest when we don't even see the entire surface? Well, there's again 2 things here. This is the moment when Venus is at not too small of a phase, but also very close to us still. At least here in Stellarium, it says the distance between us and this planet is about 0.39 AU, astronomical units. So about 40% the distance between the Earth and the Sun. And so it can get farther than that in Venus's orbit, and as it moves farther away from us, Venus actually gets smaller in the sky and dimmer. But when it's farther away, it's at a larger phase. But even though it's at a larger phase, the distance is a bigger factor in its brightness than its actual phase. But right now, Venus just passed us in its orbit, got really close to us, and when it did so, the far side of Venus was lit, so we couldn't see it then. and now has emerged on the other side of the sun, now in our morning sky, and we see a little bit of it lit. So if it's a little bit less phase, it's not as bright. So it has kind of reached a nice medium between its distance to us and a little bit larger of a phase, making it the brightest this week for 2022 and up until July of 2023. And the reason why it's going to take so long for Venus to get as bright as it is now is because of where Earth and Venus lie in the solar system. So here in Uniview, we can actually play this out and look at what's going on over the next about year and a half. So this is set to February 9th right now. So you can see Earth here in its orbit around the sun, and there is Venus. So they're not at their closest, but again, Venus is far enough from the sun at the right phase, but still pretty close for it to be its brightest as seen from our planet. But as we move ahead in time here, let's just kind of speed through the year and into 2023 eventually. You'll see Venus moves very, very quickly around the sun, faster than Earth does because it's closer to the sun. So it has an inside track in the solar system, kind of like a racetrack here. So as we move through time here, we're now actually in the summer of 2022 this year, and you can see Venus is kind of moving ahead in its orbit. Earth is trying to catch up but never will. And as it goes around, you see Venus moving farther and farther from Earth here. This would be a full phase Venus, but look how far away Venus is from Earth in this view. And it will continue on. And eventually, as Earth continues its orbit and Venus kind of rounds around the sun, starting to catch up with Earth, now we're in about the end of the year time frame for 2022 and now entering into 2023 now. And now Venus finally is starting to catch up again. And through all of this time, Venus is not at its closest to us until we move through kind of the winter and spring of 2023. Then we're moving continually through that time of year as we move through the spring and eventually the summertime. And now we get to close to about July of 2023, which is here. And notice where Venus and Earth are again. They're kind of in a different position. This is when you'd see Venus in the evening sky, but you'll notice that they're kind of close once more. So it took all that time for the orbits to kind of catch up and line up again for Venus to get bright enough in our sky, because it will finally be close enough to Earth by the summer of next year. So there's our crash course on why Venus is so bright. It's at the right crescent phase, still pretty close to us in its orbit around the sun. And if you do find it, it's not alone in the sky. There's some other planets nearby. We have Mars down here, which is kind of nice. The reddish planet, definitely not as bright as Venus, but those two planets are actually getting closer and closer in our sky, which is nice. And then we have Mercury down here as well. It sits pretty low near the horizon there. And these planets are fairly near the constellation we see here, which is Sagittarius, the half man, half horse, which actually looks like a teapot in the sky that we have right there. So that's kind of a nice little area to check out with these planets, especially Venus at its brightest starting on the 9th and through the rest of the week. And the brightest will see this planet until the summer of 2023. Well, you made it through another edition of our Sky Tonight program. Thank you very much for tuning in. And if you're in the area in Daytona Beach, please stop by the Museum of Arts and Sciences and definitely the Lohman Planetarium. We're running shows every day. And I want to mention a very important event we're holding in the museum and the planetarium on Saturday, February 12th. That is when we're celebrating International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And what we like to do at that event is to amplify and celebrate the importance of women and girls in pursuing, teaching, conducting, and learning science. So we have influential women in various STEM careers giving presentations in our Lohman Planetarium, and in our Root Hall exhibition area, we have some amazing clubs and organizations from local universities and environmental organizations, and even Volusia County Science Fair winners that will be showing off their work and talking to our guests and talking about science and celebrating women and girls in science, which is a very exciting day for us. So come by on Saturday, February 12th from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. for these talks to see these exhibitors. It's a great day for you to stop by the Museum of Arts and Sciences and the Lohman Planetarium. So hopefully we'll see you there or back here again for another episode. Take care, and of course, happy stargazing.